and welcome back. And today, I have kind of an interesting one. Good guy, war hero, as depicted, or, giant butthead. I don't know, but let's really delve into the history of George Custer and the Battle of Little Bighorn. George Custer was born December 5th, 1839, in New Rumley, Ohio, and he was one of 7 children to his father. On his paternal side, his ancestors came to the colonies around 1693 from Rhineland, and they settled in New York and Pennsylvania. On his maternal side, his father's second wife, his ancestors were English and Ulster Scots descent. His parents named him after George Armstrong, who was a minister to his devout mother. Apparently, his mother had hoped that by giving George this name, he might eventually join the clergy. That didn't happen. George went on to live with an older half-sister and her husband in Monroe, Michigan, so that he could attend school. He initially went to McNeely Normal School, which would later become Hopedale Normal College in Hopedale, Ohio. This school had a reputation for training teachers for elementary schools. When he graduated from McNeely in 1856, he taught school in Cadiz, Ohio, and met his first love, Mary Jane Holland. He didn't remain a teacher for long, and on July 1st, 1857, he would enter West Point as a cadet. This was supposed to be a 5-year course, but when the Civil War started in 1861, it was shortened to 4 years. Custer graduated West Point June 24th, 1861, and the initial class of 79 only ended up graduating 34, to include Custer. 23 classmates had dropped out, and another 22 left the program to join the Confederacy. During his time at West Point, he had recorded 726 demerits, which was one of the worst conduct records in the history of West Point. One local minister described Custer as the instigator of devilish plots both during the service and in Sunday school. On the surface, he appeared attentive and respectful, but underneath, the mind boiled with disruptive ideas. One roommate said of Custer, "It was all right with George Custer, whether he knew his lesson or not. He simply did not allow it to trouble him." And this all just kind of sounds like the perfect storm of what was about to become of George Custer. During the Civil War, Custer was commissioned as a second lieutenant and was assigned to the 2nd U.S. Cavalry, where he was tasked with drilling volunteers in D.C. July 21st, 1861, he was with his regiment at the First Run, where he was given the task of carrying the messages to Major General Dowd. He continued in the defense of D.C. until October of 1861, when he became ill. He returned home until February of 1862, and then in March, he participated in the Peninsula Campaign in Virginia, and that lasted until April 4th. On April 5th, he served in the 5th Cavalry Regiment and participated in the siege of Yorktown until April 4th as aide to Major General George B. McClellan. May 24th, 1862, in pursuit of Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston, Custer, with General McClellan and staff, were at a potential crossing point on the Chickahominy River. While there, Custer overheard John B. Bernard say, "I wish I knew how deep it is." This prompted Custer to rush forward on his horse out into the middle of the river, where he turned to the other officers and shouted, "McClellan, this is how deep it is, General." This gave Custer the assignment to lead an attack with 4 companies of the 4th Michigan Infantry across the Chickahominy River above Newbridge. Custer and his group were successful in the attack, And, as a bonus, they captured 50 Confederate soldiers and seized the first Confederate battle flag. Custer would go on to be promoted to captain on June 5th, 1862. He was demoted back to first lieutenant on July 17th. This happened not because he did anything wrong. It was just something that happened to many soldiers during the Civil War, where they were reverted back to their permanent ranks after the war had ended. Weird, I know, but I mean, in some ways, it kind of makes sense. Custer had other roles in the war and was promoted to Major General on April 15th, 1865, the youngest Major General in the Union Army at the age of 25. After the war's official end on April 25th, 1865, Custer and his men went on search for a prize racehorse named Don Juan near Clarksville, Virginia. They found and stole the horse, worth an estimated $10,000 at the time, which is almost $200,000 today. They stole the horse. They stole the pedigree papers. And Custer was brazen enough to ride the horse during the victory parade in D.C. on May 23rd, where the horse bolted, and then the original owner, Richard Gaines, wrote a letter to General Grant about the horse, and Grant ordered Custer to return the horse. Custer opted instead to do his own thing, and he hid the horse. Then he won a horse race with it in 1866, and then the horse suddenly died. Enough of his background, we got it. This is what he did. And now we come to July 28th, 1866, where Custer was appointed Lieutenant Colonel of the new 7th Cavalry Regiment, which was headquartered in Fort Riley, Kansas. Here, he served frontier duty from October 18th to March 26th, and he scouted in Kansas and Colorado until July 28th, 1867. He had taken part in General Winfield Scott Hancock's expedition against the Cheyenne. Lieutenant Lyman Kidder was with a party of 10 troops and one scout on June 26th. They were on their way to deliver dispatches to Custer at Fort Wallace from General Sherman. Lieutenant Kidder's party was attacked by Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne, and they were all massacred. But it would be days later when the bodies were discovered by Custer and a search party. The Indian Wars were a result of the Indians being assigned reservations after the Civil War, where reservations were under control of the Interior Department and control of the Great Plains were under the Army's Department of Missouri, which was an area of over 1 million miles of land between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. Major General Winfield S. Hancock was in charge of leading the department in 1866. He managed to mess up this assignment, which resulted in Sioux and Cheyenne raids attacking mail stagecoaches, burning mail stations, killing employees. These raids also raped, killed, and kidnapped settlers on the frontier. It was a whole mess. Can't really say that I blame him. After the disaster that Hancock apparently was, President Johnson replaced him with Philip Sheridan. Sheridan was the military governor of Louisiana and Texas in 1866, but he was removed from that post due to claims he was ruling over the area with absolute tyranny and insubordination. Upon his arrival to take over for Hancock, Sheridan was ordered to pacify the plains and take control of the Indians there. Sheridan took this opportunity to call Custer back to command the 7th Cavalry after Hancock had suspended Custer. We don't know why. but it's Custer. It was really tough going for Sheridan when he took over at first, as commissioners from the government signed a peace treaty in October 1867 with the Comanche, Kiowa, Apache, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, offering them reservation land and food and supplies. Congress failed to pass this agreement, and this failure to act by Congress resulted in the promised food and supplies not reaching the Indians, and they began to starve. Sheridan had 2,600 men at the time to defend against the attacks. They were undersupplied and stationed at forts that were, well, in bad shape. Although Sheridan did attempt to make conditions better at not just the military posts, but for the Indians, due to lack of supplies making it to the Indians, they weren't really ready to discuss peace. Sheridan his hands were tied. When the Indians complained to Sheridan about the fact that the supplies weren't being delivered as promised, Sheridan would give them rations. But not long after this, the Saline Valley settlements were attacked by Indians, and other raids and kidnappings happened in the region as well. Sheridan wanted to respond with force, but his own troops weren't well supplied, and he was being restrained by the government's peace policy. Custer, under Sheridan's orders, took part in establishing a camp supply in Indian Territory in early November 1868. This was supposed to be a supply base for a winter campaign. Custer led the 7th Cavalry in an attack on a Cheyenne encampment of Chief Black Kettle on November 27, 1868. This was the Battle of Washita River, where Custer reported that he had killed 103 warriors, 53 women and children were taken prisoner. The Cheyenne estimates were considerably lower, stating it was only 11 warriors that were killed and 19 women and children that were taken. And to make all of this worse, Custer ordered his men to shoot most of the 875 Indian ponies they had captured. Why? Because apparently he didn't like horses. In 1874, Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills, where the discovery of the French Creek, present-day Custer, South Dakota, led to the Black Hills Gold Rush, which led to Deadwood, South Dakota, becoming a town. Deadwood, notorious for its lawlessness. During this expedition, the conflicts and tensions were high between the U.S. and many of the Plains Indians, including the Lakota Sioux and the Cheyenne. The expansion west by European Americans meant many of them broke treaty agreements to further advance west, and this resulted in violence from both sides. To curtail this mess, the U.S. decided to take possession of the Black Hills and the gold, and they decided they were going to round up all of the remaining free Indians there. President Grant set a deadline of July 31st, 1876 for all Lakota and Arapaho who were wintering in unceded territory to arrive at their designated reservations, or they would be considered hostile. May 17th, 1876, Custer and the 7th Cavalry left Fort Abraham Lincoln as part of a larger group with a plan of rounding up the remaining free Indians. So while Custer and his regiment were out looking for Indians, they were unaware of a meeting that was happening during that spring and summer in Ash Creek, Montana. It was later moved to the Little Bighorn River. That was called by Lakota holy man, Chief Sitting Bull. Here, the largest gathering of the Plains Indians took place to discuss what to do about the white man, and was a united front of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho Indians. Just to be clear here. Little Bighorn was in the Crow Indian Reservation, which was created by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. And the Valley of Little Bighorn is in the heart of Crow Indian Treaty territory. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho all knew this. They accepted it. But the Lakota ended up staying in the valley without the consent of the Crow tribe, who, by the way, sided with the army to remove the Lakota from their land. So let's just have a little lead up to this battle. June 15th, Major Marcus Reno. He's out scouting. He notices a trail of a large village on the Rosebud River. June 22nd, the entire regiment, led by Custer, was sent to follow said trail. June 25th, Crow Indian scouts, working with Custer, located what they called a large Indian encampment in the valley near the Little Bighorn River. Initially, Custer planned to attack the next morning, but it became known that he was there. Despite all of Custer's experience on the plains and in war in general, he underestimated the size, capabilities, and leadership of the combined Indian forces at Little Bighorn. He dismissed every military established strategy. He decided to divide his cavalry regiment into 4 parts, 265 men each approximately. 3 about equal to the units commanded by himself. 1 regiment was led by Major Marcus Reno, 1 by Captain Frederick Benteen, and the final by Custer, along with another small pack train led by Captain Thomas M. McDougall. Reno went north to charge the southern end of the camp. Custer rode north and was hidden to the east of the camp by bluffs where he planned to circle around and attack from the north. Meanwhile, Benteen was sent south and west to scout Indian presence and perhaps allow protection from the south. This is how it starts. Here's where the trouble for Custer and his men started. Reno started his charge south of the camp, but he stopped around 500 to 600 yards short, where he had his men dismount and form a skirmish line. That was an oopsie, as they were overcome by mounted Lakota and Cheyenne, who made a counterattack that exposed Reno's left flank, thus forcing Reno and his men to take cover in the trees along the river. From there, Reno and his troops made their stand and engaged in a retreat up the bluffs above the river. This ended up costing Reno about 1/4 of his troops. It is believed that Custer saw Reno stop, form the skirmish line, and led him to have his troops head to the northern end of the camp, perhaps hoping to sandwich the Indians in between the 2 attacking troops. With Reno and his men retreating to the bluffs, Custer and his men were attacked and driven off by Indian sharpshooters who were hiding in the brush on the west bank of the river. After that, Custer and his 265 men were attacked by, in some accounts, hundreds of Indian warriors. Others say at least 3,000 Indian warriors. Either way, the warriors were pursued by soldiers to the ridge of the camp. Custer and his men were unable to dig in by Crazy Horse and his warriors. The soldiers were eventually surrounded from the north at the crest of the ridge, and we all know how it ended for Custer and his men. Any surviving troop eventually shot their remaining horses to use as a shield for their final stand at the north end of the ridge. Eventually, the warriors, Indian warriors, closed in and killed every man in Custer's command, including Custer. Battle of Little Bighorn also became known as Custer's Last Stand, or, because he really, really underestimated what he was going into. He just kind of thought, I am General George Custer. Because, can't say that. He was words I can't say on YouTube.
He was a pompous mule.
Yes. I had another name, but I can't say that either. Anyway.
A fluffy bottom.
Fluffy bottom. But anyway, Hollywood depicts the Battle of Little Bighorn as this massive drama. Really, there wasn't any drama. By most accounts, it suggested that the shooting from Custer's Ridge was over in under 20 minutes. Reno and his men survived by being further behind the main column, where they ran to the hills. Literally, run to the hills. As the men under Custer's command were cut down, warriors took the weapons and the ammunition and got more firepower, because that's how it's done. Custer might have thought he was smarter than the natives he was after, but he was proven to be so wrong in all of his arrogance. It is believed that the reason Custer has long been depicted as a martyr in the Indian wars is due to his wife, Elizabeth Bacon Custer, and how she created his public image, which she never mentioned. Custer was arrested for AWOL, absent without leave, after leaving his post to see his wife, and he actually was held for a time at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas until August 12th, 1868. He was requested by Major General Sheridan for a planned winter campaign against the Cheyenne, and that's what made him be allowed to be returned to duty before his 1-year suspension ended. Custer became a ghostwriter during the Civil War and would pretend to be a correspondent to inflate his own role in battles and inflate what he had done. His wife would write a book that overly glorified him and his exploits in battle. She also wrote a pamphlet defending Custer for Little Bighorn after a man on a separate operation, Frederick Benteen, said that Custer recklessly endangered his own troops. Frederick was one of the men assigned to a different assignment after Custer ordered them to be divided up. For decades, Elizabeth Custer wrote articles about her husband and eventually organized commemorations of the battle, creating statues of him as well. As every man that was under the command of Custer perished in the Battle of Little Bighorn that was there to fight, this included a journalist who had been covering him that summer. And that Benteen being basically silenced by Elizabeth, it was easy enough for Hollywood and history to depict Custer as some martyr, some hero, some great guy. And today it's still taught that way. But it's rarely depicted that the Indians were also brave for defending themselves and their traditions against Europeans continuing to come west, violating all of the treaties. Here's the thing, though. The Treaty of Laramie gave the area where Little Bighorn took place to the Lakota. Which is weird, because it was to the Crow at first. This was great until the discovery of gold in the Black Hills, which drove people to the hills looking to get rich. The Indians were fighting back, and that made perfect sense, because under the treaty, they were rightfully defending their land. But you know what? You let me know your thoughts down in the comments. War hero, some big giant doo-doo head. You tell me. And hey, let's keep the conversation going. And maybe while you're down there, If you want to give it a like, give it a like. And if you're not subscribed, maybe subscribe, because I know unsubscribers are out there watching, and I appreciate you watching, but why not just subscribe? It'd be so much easier. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. It's never.
It never ceases to amaze me the more you learn about the Custer. He's just such a tool.
Well, it's like it's not even the same guy that they were teaching us about in high school. It's like, excuse me, what?
Kind of a pompous, arrogant,
Jerk.
overstuffed
Jerk. Just a jerk. Oh my gosh.